Like most modern wars, this story's roots are with the Cold War. The Soviets weren't the only communist nation to collapse and form lots of new countries. Yugoslavia did as well, starting with Slovenia in 1991 and then in Croatia shortly after. In short, this caused a chain reaction of independent movements, which caused Europe's last bloody war. In the end, Slovenia, Croatia, North Macedonia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina all broke free, leaving Yugoslavia comprised of just Serbia and Montenegro. But there was one independence movement that hadn't gained independence: Kosovo. In 1999, NATO had finally had enough of doing nothing and wanted to flex its muscles in Europe now Russia possessed less of a threat by bombing another country. The bombing started because of an increase in fighting in Kosovo between the Yugoslav forces and the Kosovo Liberation Army, the KLA. The KLA intended to force the Yugoslav army and police out of Kosovo and replace them with UN peacekeepers. Yugoslavia rejected the idea of an external peacekeeping force, so in retaliation NATO prepared to start bombing Yugoslavia to force them to accept. Bombing started on March the 24th. It was an even fight. NATO had over 1,000 aircraft and 30 warships, while the Yugoslavs had 14 modern aircraft. The war ended on June the 10th. During the 78 days of bombing, the Yugoslavs lost 120 tanks, 220 APCs, 450 artillery pieces and 121 aircraft. NATO fared a bit better, with 3 jet fighters, 2 helicopters and 46 UAVs being destroyed. One of the 3 jet fighters that was shot down by the Yugoslavs was an F-117 Nighthawk. This is a stealth jet that was supposedly invisible to radar. On the 27th of March, 3 days into the bombing, Lieutenant Colonel Daryl Zelko of the US Air Force was flying alone, and had been for several hours when he appeared just north of Belgrade. Readying himself for a bombing run, he slowed down to 500 miles per hour and kept radio silence. The F-117 was supposedly invisible to radar, so the Lieutenant Colonel must have been surprised when his missile approach warning system alerted him. Around 30 surface-to-air missiles were on his tail, sent up from a Yugoslav version of an outdated Soviet SAM system. Only one of the missiles hit the plane, but this was enough to turn it into a burning ball in the night sky. Once the plane was visible, around 20 AA guns then opened fire. The Lieutenant Colonel put out a mayday call whilst in the burning plane, and then ejected. Zelko landed only a mile away from the downed stealth jet. At this time the US had deployed AH-64 and MH-53 helicopters from Bosnia full of US Rangers to find him. Zelko quickly hid in a ditch, but it wasn't long until the Yugoslav forces arrived at the crash site looking for him, so they could use him as a bargaining chip. At some points they were only a few hundred yards away from the ditch he was hiding in. After 8 hours, Zelko was finally rescued by the Rangers. The Yugoslavs might not have had a hostage to show, but they still had a crashed stealth jet to show the world. The next day, the media arrived. In most countries, when you shoot down a futuristic aircraft, you will cordon off the area and take the plane away immediately. But Yugoslavia was run a bit differently, so they let the local children play on the wreckage. Most kids play on Warzone whilst the Serbs play in the Warzone. The local people also attacked the wreckage and took parts home as souvenirs. At this time, a Russian trade delegation was scrambled to Belgrade. The Russians wanted a piece of the wreckage so they could make anti-stealth jet weapons, but wouldn't pay the going rate that Yugoslavia charged, which was military assistance. Many people believe some of the plane ended up in Beijing. After running out of parts to sell, t-shirts and memorabilia were quickly made and sold, bearing the words, "Sorry, we didn't know it was invisible." The F-117 was supposedly invisible to radar, and as the Yugoslavs didn't usually turn on their radar sights due to them being blown up, this has led many people to believe there must have been some Russian technology there helping the Yugoslavians. However, shooting down one stealth jet was not going to make NATO back down, so the bombing continued until the 10th of June, and the war ended the next day, with the signing of the Kumanovo Agreement, which stated the Yugoslavs had to leave Kosovo and that an independence referendum would be held in 3 years' time. Kosovo is now left in a limbo state, where it's not widely recognised and peace is not guaranteed. This is the story of how an invisible jet was shot down. Thanks for watching. I'd love to see the comments down below. And if you'd like to see the story of when Boris Johnson was in the war zone in Yugoslavia and when the US ordered the Brits to attack Russia in Yugoslavia, comment down below.